South America in the 15th century. They appear out of nowhere. Within just a few decades, they build the largest empire in the world, the Incas. In Europe, there's talk of a country with fabulous gold deposits, somewhere in the Andes. Worshipped by his people as a divine king, the Inca rules over an empire of 10 million people, from the steep highlands of the Andes to the deserts of the Peruvian coast. This culture appears mysterious and strange. Many things still raise questions and puzzle researchers even today. Who were these extraordinary people? The rulers saw themselves as sons of the sun. They believed their empire would last forever, until the arrival of Spanish conquistadors suddenly changed everything. This is the conquistador Francisco Pizarro. He will not give up until he has found the country Peru with its fabulous gold treasures. But in May of the year 1527, the situation seems hopeless when he disembarks at the beach of the Isla Gallo in the north of South America. He has lost many of his men. The survivors are exhausted. Their greed for gold has long since given way to the naked fight for survival. A new supply ship is supposed to save them. Then he wants to make one final attempt. The Spaniard has no idea what is awaiting him in the New World. The Inca Empire, the most powerful and largest state on the continent. Its success story begins in the 15th century, with someone who wants to change the world. Pachacutec. As a victorious commander, he takes over power and proclaims his divine rank as the son of the sun god Inti, a descent which from then on all Inca rulers will claim for themselves. With breathtaking speed, their empire expands. The Incas subdue over 200 tribes. Soon they rule over an empire of 10 million people. Boldly, mercilessly, and effectively.
Inca armies were incredibly numerous in terms of soldiers, 50,000, 100,000, and even more in certain cases. So it was a huge strength. The most successful Inca ruler is probably, an Inca conqueror, is probably Tupac Yupanqui, Pachacutec's son, who has conquered tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of kilometers square. You can compare him to Genghis Khan or Alexander the Great, both for the size of what he has conquered and the quickness of his conquest.
In just 80 years, the Incas conquer an area that stretches from present-day Chile and Argentina across the entire length of the Andes to Ecuador. A gigantic road network with 2 main and many secondary routes runs through the empire. At its intersection, the capital Cuzco with the Coricancha, the golden temple of the sun, a place that the Incas proclaimed the navel of the world. To this day, the Inca are surrounded by an aura of mystery. Written evidence of their culture and history has only been handed down from the time of Francisco Pizarro. What caused their meteoric rise? What role did their rulers play? Once again, Pachacutec returns to the capital from a victorious campaign. He is celebrated like a god. He believes himself to be almighty, superhuman, inviolable as a ruler. And this is how his subjects see him. They are not even allowed to look their divine king in the eyes.
When the new Inca accessed the throne, he changed of essence. He was not a human being anymore. He was the son of Inti, the sun god, which makes him a kind of god himself, or semi-god. He could speak to the god and to the other wakas, which was very important for maintaining balance in the world. In anthropology, we call this kind of ruler a divine ruler, the divine kingship, which is very different from, for instance, European monarch, who ruled by divine grace, but not by divine descent.
3 rows of walls, made of granite blocks weighing several tons, piled up to 12 meters high, cut and polished by thousands of workers and transported here from quarries. Today, the temple complex Sacsayhuamán above Cuzco is a unique testimony to the Inca architecture.
Yes, there are many secrets surrounding Sacsayhuamán. There is still very little known about the place. We don't know how they were able to move these large stone blocks and put them on top of each other.
Built without cement and mortar, the stones are so perfectly anchored in the walls that not even a knife blade would fit in between. Custom made for an impenetrable bulwark, which also served as a place of worship, or was intended as such from the very beginning.
Pachacutec wanted to show the power of the Incas, the power of religion, the power of the gods. It was created as an enormous ritual place in Coricancha. It had a giant, spectacular gathering place with walls that displayed the deities, like, for example, lightning, water, or the puma.
The mysterious combination of the spiritual and the profane, of domination and religion, seems to be common practice among the Incas. All across the empire, they erect new buildings, often in extremely inaccessible places. But what purpose these gigantic buildings served has not yet been fully clarified. Why all these efforts? And why here, of all places? Today, researchers assume that architectural marvels, such as the legendary royal palace of Machu Picchu, reflect above all the religious beliefs of the Incas, going back as far as their founding myths. In the beginning, it is said, there was only darkness and chaos, until the Creator created the stars, the moon, and the sun. The sun god Inti chose the Incas as his children. As Inti's son, the Inca was to rule on earth and turn disorder into order, just like the Creator in the sky. The powerful sun cult is the backbone of their state ideology. The ruler's actions are based on the old myths.
The Inca developed in an Andean culture that had this concept of the huaca. That's a special place, springs, rocks, mountains, streams, and so forth. And each one of these were imbued with certain power. And then the Inca took that concept and they made it a little more sophisticated, and they turned it into a state religion that, in their view, justified their conquest of the Andes.
Huacas. This is what the Incas call their mighty natural sanctuaries, which for them are present everywhere in their empire like landmarks of the gods. About 100 kilometers away from Machu Picchu, the old Inca city of Choqquequirao rises at an altitude of more than 3,000 meters. Pachacutec had its temples and palaces partly hewn vertically into the rocks. It has long been assumed that a holy place was the decisive factor for the choice of the location. When the first archaeologists uncovered the terraces on the western steep slope in the 1970s, an unexpected mosaic appeared. 24 llama figures with white slate inserted into the stone walls. Yacana, the llama, is considered a holy animal by the Incas, and they even see it in the sky as a constellation. Pachacutec had left nothing to chance at this location. In addition, He had a whole mountaintop removed and transformed into a huge platform, making it possible to oversee the wide panorama of the mountains.
They choose specific places with sacred mountains, and they adapted the architecture to the nature, and not imposing architecture on nature, which is very different. This is what we call it landscape architecture. You have examples at Machu Picchu, you have examples at Choquequirao, when everywhere you look, you see, wow, this is wonderful point of view, this is also. This is because it has been thought that way by the Incas in order to worship this environment and to create a kind of scenario for the emperor himself as the center of the ceremonies to communicate with all this landscape.
Astronomical calculations have shown that in Choquequirao, at the summer solstice, the sun rises exactly behind the Yanacocha Glacier, worshipped by the Incas. (1470). The Incas conquer one state after the other. Their next destination, the coastal kingdom of the Chimu, with its metropolis, Chan Chan. Their approach follows the simple strategy: cooperation or war, submission or death. It starts with a peaceful takeover bid. Precious gifts are presented to the Chimu king. In return, the Incas demand buildings for their administration, craftsmen, and men for military services as tribute. In view of the military superiority of the Incas, many tribal chiefs submit to the Inca. They exchange their power for the privileges offered. However, their hitherto independent rule is absorbed into the Inca Empire.
The expansion of the Incas meant the suppression and destruction of societies that lived autonomously and had developed independently until then. The invasion stopped this development and turned these peoples into tribute payers. The tribute was the decisive social motivation for the Incas to conquer foreign peoples.
Miguel Conecho has led the excavations in the Chimu city of Chan Chan for over 20 years. He discovered how rigidly the Incas dealt with peoples who did not cooperate with them. The Chimu, famous for their architecture and craftsmanship, were a rich people with a centuries-old high culture when Inca Tupac Yupanqui began to besiege their capital around 1470. For 10 years, the Chimu resisted. Then, the Incas cut off the water supply. In the end, the proud Chimu had no choice but to bow their heads before the Incas.
The Incas had great interest in the Chimu kingdom because they had specialists. They had goldsmiths, ceramists, and great builders. Chan Chan is an example of their great architecture. From the beginning, the Incas intended to relocate these specialists for their own purposes.
The goldsmiths of the subjugated Chimu are brought to Cuzco to gild palaces and temples with their skills. Today, there are hardly any gold objects from the Inca period left. Only artifacts of the previous cultures give us an impression of what the legendary Inca gold might have looked like. Their greatest treasure, the most precious sanctuary in the whole country for the Inca and his people, is the Coricancha, Cuzco's main temple. The massive golden sun disk in its interior represents the earthly manifestation of the sun god Inti. Here the ruler holds a dialogue with the gods.
Gold was a symbol for the sun. It had no material value. This can also be seen from the fact that it was called Tears of the Sun, and it was always used to worship or represent the sun. That's why the inside of the sun temple was lined with gold plates. The Inca ruler, who himself was the son of the sun, ate from golden dishes. The Inca nobles, who were also descendants of the sun, were allowed to wear golden jewelry, which were forbidden to other people.
When an Inca king died, his power was far from broken. As an immortal deity, he lived on in the community. His mummy was an indispensable advisor for the living. Thus, the great founder of the empire, Pachacutec, remains present after his death as a divine mediator between the worlds. These mummies still had their servants who dressed and fed them. They accompanied the living Inca ruler on his journeys and took part in festivals. Tupac Yupanqui will also commit himself to this tradition as the successor of his father. And for him, too, the advice from the hereafter will be a decisive guide in his conquests.
The Inca had a very, very special kind of inheritance system where the new emperor did not inherit the wealth, but he inherited the mechanisms of power of the empire. And the new emperor had to go out and get new territory. Otherwise, he could not provide for his faction. The old emperor owned the old territory. His mummy, the actual mummy, was the owner of the previous conquests. And as long as that mummy existed, his clan, his group, had access to that wealth.
To break the magic of the dead, the Spaniards were later to burn the mummies of all the rulers. In the eyes of the Inca people, an unbelievable regicide. Mortal remains of less prominent people have been preserved for research and provide insights into the medical abilities of the early Andean cultures. Numerous finds in the Archaeological Museum of Lima show elaborate surgical procedures, including even skull openings, the trepanations.
The special thing about this specimen is the opening of the skull, which is quite shocking to us. The skull shows that this person must have suffered a trauma at some point in his life. Healers then apparently took action. First, they scratched the skull bone thinner and thinner until they reached the last layer that covers the brain. Then they also cut through this layer to release the pressure.
Artfully closed and healed, some patients seem to have survived this procedure. By examining skulls and mummies, experts in Lima try to reconstruct individual medical histories. This man, for example, had been operated on before his death. He was between 30 and 40 years old and was corpulent, as his wrinkled skin proves. An oyster shell was placed on his chest, a burial gift that only wealthy people were allowed to have.
We can still see the badly healed skin on the bones. I think this person didn't survive and died from the complications of the surgery.
Tupac Yupanqui seems to have followed the advice of his father's mummy. Indeed, his campaign to the north was successful. Now, he moves along the coastal road to Pachacamac, the next region he wants to annex to his growing empire. This place was holy even to the pre-Inca cultures, because there's a powerful oracle here in the desert. Now, its magical attraction is meant to serve the new ruler. Researchers from a Belgian-Peruvian joint project have been working here for 20 years. They want to find out what significance this sacred site had for the people before and during the Inca period. For excavation director Peter Ikut, the terrain is a rare treasure trove.
Pachacamac, it's a huge site that was occupied during more than 1,000 years when the Incas arrived. It was the seat of the sanctuary of a powerful god, which was called Pachacamac, and which was a creator god and also an oracle. And Pachacamac holds a special place in the cosmology of the Incas, the way they were seeing the world.
Archaeological investigations show that the Incas preserved the old cult, but on the conditions of the victor. On the highest point of the complex, they built a sun temple for their main god Inti, which from then on towered over the oracle temple of the local god Pachacamac. Thus, the balance of power was clear. The oracle of Pachacamac lives in a crypt down below, in the painted temple from the pre-Inca period. Strict rules apply here. No one but the priest may enter the interior of the temple.
The priest drank psychotropic beverage and had hallucination, sound, and also visions. And so in that state, which is called utirayai, which means furiousness, he entered the crypt of the idol, which was in total darkness.
In a trance, he makes contact with a god. But to look into Pachacamac's wooden eyes is forbidden to him. One god with two sides and faces. Pachacamac sees into the future and into the past. He connects the universal opposites. The Incas also believe this is how the present and the living world is created. This holy place has completely been taken over by the Incas. Wall finds give the researchers rare insights into the events of that time. The remains in the current excavation section once belonged to an administrative institution of the Incas. But then, the archaeologists bring to light bones from a much older burial ground.
When the Incas constructed it, there were tombs here, but old tombs. So the Incas didn't care, and they disturbed the tomb. So as you can see it, there is lots of bones not in their position, disturbed by the Incas, who showed no respect for these people that were not their ancestors.
Then, Peter Ekut and his team make another sensational find. These are objects the likes of which have never been excavated in Pachacamac before. In the nearby excavation archive, a penguin becomes everybody's darling. Over the years, the experts have collected numerous unusual objects here, all of them precious offerings brought here by pilgrims from their distant homeland. Colorful feathers from the Amazon, filigree fabrics, vessels decorated with shells.
The objects that we find are made from materials that come from very far away. So this is a proof that the Incas had succeeded in making the site something very important, and the pilgrimage has known a very important boom at this time. Thousands of people were coming a year at Pachacamac.
The Incas turned Pachacamac into the Mecca of the Andes. That's how they brought one of the continent's most sacred sites under their control. In order to keep the many conquered tribes under the direct rule of the Inca in check, hard rules apply to the simple subjects. They must not only produce food for the community, their labor must also be available for the Incas at all times. Everywhere in the country, administrative and tax centers are established to handle the tribute payments. Since the Inca didn't use money, the taxes are paid in kind. The tribute is meticulously registered by not experts. They are the powerful data guardians of the Inca Empire. Using an ingenious system of colored strings on which knots are arranged, the so-called quipus, they produce highly complex statistics for all matters of the state.
The quipu was very important for the Inca Empire. Because there was no written documentation, the empire needed a way for the administration to record things. An empire cannot function if it has no data on taxes, production, or census.
Even before the Incas, the Andean peoples used knotted cords as information carriers, but it was the Incas who used them as a governmental regulation, as a perfect system for bookkeeping and an instrument of their bureaucracy. Lined up on a head cord, each knot on the individual cords represents a certain numerical value. Depending on its position and the way it is tied, it stands for thousands, hundreds, and tens, a perfect database. The royal quipu is a showpiece. It summarized information from smaller quipus, intended for the central quipu archive in Cuzco.
The quipu are still a mystery to us. From Spanish chronicles, we know that the Incas could tell stories with them. They contained historical information which unfortunately have all been lost. We don't know how to read the quipu and don't understand these stories.
The art of reading and weaving quipu was reserved only for a small elite. They were the guardians of all collected information, and probably for this reason, they were among the most powerful men in the state. Runners take over the transport of the quipus. Through their well-organized relay system, they bridge even long distances in the network of Inca roads in the shortest time. They also delivered important oral messages. (1493). Inca Tupac Yupanqui, the great conqueror, is dead. For 1 year, the people will mourn their dead ruler. At every full and new moon night, the community performs the cult of the dead. It symbolizes the guidance for the soul of the deceased, which sets out on a journey beyond space and time to the world of the ancestors. Their transformation shall take place, nourished by drink, smoke, and blood sacrifices. Tupac Yupanqui's successor, the new Inca Huayna Capac, was soon to face an unexpected disaster. "900 kilometers west of Cuzco, one hole next to the other in rows of 4, 1.5 miles in length. That's why this mysterious structure is called Band of Holes. It seems to stretch endlessly up the ridge of Monte Sierpe.
I got a phone call from a fella from the United States who said, "What do you think of that site called Band of Holes?" And I'd never heard of it before. So the next time I was working here, Henry and I came up and we looked around and said, "We really have no idea what's going on. This is a great mystery."
This strange formation fascinated the archaeologist. Charles Stanish counted a good 5,000 holes. At irregular intervals, they are repeatedly interrupted in their arrangement. They seem to form individual sections. What were they used for? Each individual hole is fastened at the edges with stones. The diameter is about 1 meter, and they are half to 1 meter deep.
What's so special about this site is it's unique in the Andes. There's never been anything like this described, and that would be odd because there's plenty of deserts. So this makes it unique, and it really doesn't conform to anything we've ever really discovered before.
The archaeologists are puzzled. Could these holes have been the units of measurement for the local tax office? Only 4 kilometers to the east lies the former Inca settlement of Tambo, Colorado. Strategically located on the road to the highlands, the city serves as an administrative center, the headquarters of the tax authorities, and as a military base. The idea that in the vicinity of such a town there might also have been a counting point for the recording of agricultural yields does not seem to be made up out of thin air.
Tambo, Colorado is ideally situated, and the band of holes is where the valley becomes very narrow, and it's right where people would come up and the agriculture was over. It's on the road, and so to me, my interpretation is that Tambo, Colorado is intimately connected to the band of holes as an accounting device.
Each hole a measure filling for the agricultural tributes? Or were astronomers and spiritual grandmasters rather than bureaucrats at work here? Some believe that the huge image of a snake, a sacred power animal for the Incas, was created here with a lot of effort. Beyond the deserts, every free spot in the Inca Empire is used for agriculture. Yield increase is key, because for the growing population and the huge army, ever larger reserves have to be stored. The expansion of agriculture is therefore systematically promoted. New high-yielding varieties are bred. The Incas cultivate 3,500 different potato varieties and about 250 different varieties of cereals and vegetables such as beans and corn, regardless of the sometimes dizzying heights. Andenes, the word for terraces, still gives the mountain range its name today. With hundreds of thousands of them, the Incas transformed steep slopes into cultivated land. They specifically focus on studying the best growing conditions for their crops. Apparently, the Incas successfully tested earth from a different region of their empire at each level at the terraces of Morai. The farmers achieved harvest surpluses and stored reserves for emergencies. But they are not prepared for the disaster that is about to befall them. November 1527.
There are people who can surely be nothing but gods, because they claim to have come with the wind. They are bearded, very beautiful, and very white people. They eat from silver plates, and even their animals, large animals which carry them, have silver shoes.
When the Inca Huayna Capac receives the news of the arrival of strangers at the border of his empire, he has no idea of the dramatic events that will soon take place. For him, the son of the sun, the newcomers cannot possibly be a threat. After months of waiting on the Isla Gallo, Pizarro's reinforcements have finally arrived, although fewer men than expected. Now he dares the first exploration on the mainland. As it happens, he actually meets locals who offer nothing less than gold for a trade. And he is told that there's supposed to be much, much more of it inland in the mountains. Now Pizarro knows where he is heading. His finest hours are about to come.
What happened was the Spaniards arrived, and the Inca saw them as dirty, useless, and wasn't even a threat. They did not see them as a threat. In fact, the Inca Empire collapsed largely on the hubris of the Inca Emperor, who ignored that threat for too long.
In the years before the arrival of the Spaniards, in the heart of the Inca Empire, its ruler had other concerns. Rebellions in the north challenge Huayna Capac. He strikes them down, but one trouble spot remains, so Quito is to become the second capital, because his bitterest enemies occupy the territory between Quito and Cuzco. Chachapoyas, fog warriors. That is what the Inca called the rebels from the rainforest, whose land they conquered, but whose people they could never completely defeat. Gran Pachacutec, wrested from the wilderness and reconstructed according to archaeological findings. No straight lines and no right angles. Unlike the Incas and all other Andean peoples, the Chachapoyas build round houses for their warriors, which they decorate with zigzag and lozenge patterns. They bury their princes near the clouds in the sky as upright guardians of the mountains. How they manage to place the elaborate clay sarcophagi on the steep slopes often remains a mystery. But one thing is certain. The Chachapoya developed an independent high culture long before the arrival of the Incas and became masters of the vertical. Their mighty mountain fortress Cuelap, as it probably once looked from a distance. Surrounded by walls 8 meters high and 600 meters long, it is even larger than Machu Picchu and as a fortification appears simply impregnable. But things must have turned out differently. In 2008, 80 skeletons are discovered here. All men, all carelessly buried in the earth. Many bones show signs of battle. Were they Chachapoya warriors who were taken by surprise by the Incas in Cuelap? Even the huge fortress was probably not to be held against the superiority of a huge Inca army. After decades of wars, of conquest, the Inca Empire is at the zenith of its power. Insurgent peoples are punished, others are controlled by alliances. But suddenly, an enemy appears who cannot be defeated by armies. Silently and invisibly, it sneaks into the country. From Mexico, it reaches Peru long before the conquistadors. Measles, smallpox, flu. Tens of thousands of Indians die of these unknown epidemics. Their immune systems were unable to fight them off. And the epidemics do not stop even before the Inca Huayna Capac. His empire plunges into its deepest crisis.
In the ancient Peruvian cultures, illness is always a sign that the universe has lost its balance, and this balance must be restored. Since their religion is largely dominated by rituals of sacrifice, they turn to sacrificial offerings. When something as serious as the illness or death of an Inca happens, the universe is turned upside down. That means you have to sacrifice the most valuable thing there is, people or children, because they are life itself.
The volcanic mountain Yuyayacu in today's Argentina. In 1999, the American-Argentinian research team around Johann Reinhard sets off for the summit of one of the holiest mountains of the Incas. At an altitude of almost 7,000 meters, they unexpectedly discover sacrificial sites and the bodies of 3 children. Ice-cold and extremely dry mountain air have preserved the children's bodies in their graves as natural mummies. Further finds reveal these are children who the Incas sacrificed here 500 years ago in a ritual. Why did they have to die?
It was really one of the greatest discoveries of the decade. The state of conservation of these mummies was amazing. They were like little kids sleeping as just to get awake. So I think it was one of the greatest moments for an archaeologist, to see these little kids that are messengers from the past.
According to the Inca faith, these children were chosen ones. Children who were sacrificed to the gods in the Holy Cup of Culture ritual for the good of the ruler and the state. 1 year before their sacrificial death, the lives of these children begin to change. They are picked up from their homes, dressed in valuable clothes, and richly decorated with holy feathers.
Capacocha was the most important ceremony for Inca culture. It was an honor for their families. If one of the kids of the family was chosen, they must laugh, they must be happy, because these children were going to be gods.
High dignitaries accompany them to Cuzco, their first stop on their very long journey. The children of Yuyayaco have found their final resting place in the cold chambers of the Museo Arqueológico in Salta, Argentina. Unexpected details came to light when the mummies were examined. The little boy was named El Niño. Selected feathers for his headdress marked him out as the chosen one. He was 7 years old, well-fed, and, as hair analysis showed, he had been regularly administered cocaine and alcohol before his sacrificial death, as had the 6 and 15-year-old girls. They had spent several days in Cuzco with hundreds of other children. In a ritual, the Inca had determined at which of the country's shrines they should be sacrificed. On a final journey, they then traveled for almost a year until they reached the place of their destination. Miniatures and figures modeled on high-ranking Incas were to accompany them on their way to the gods. These are burial objects found by researchers in various children's graves.
We believe that the children were alive when they get to the summit of the Yuyayaco volcano, and they were put into these little tombs, and they died there because they were asleep, because of this chicha that was in their bodies, and because of the coldness and the low pressure, they just get asleep, and slowly they died. Death for them was not an end, was just a beginning.
1,000 human beings, children and adults, are said to have been sacrificed to the gods after Huayna Capac's death. Huayna Capac died without naming his successor. A bitter war of succession between his sons subsequently divides the country. Vast areas are now almost depopulated by disease and fratricidal warfare. It takes 5 years before one of his sons finally emerges victoriously from this cruel war. He and his army retreat to the mountains of Cajamarca. Atahualpa. His time seems to have come, but there's one thing he does not suspect. He will be the last free Inca ruler and soon seal the fate of the entire Inca Empire. At about the same time, in September 1532, Francisco Pizarro leaves the coast heading inland with almost 200 men. But not a trace of the much sought-after gold, only deserted cities. What had happened? Can Pizarro trust the Indians to lead him to their king? Weeks later, they reach Cajamarca. Atahualpa's huge army seems overpowering, and yet, the very next day, in an unprecedented carnage, they will bring about the historic turn in the history of the Incas.
Atahualpa was very confident in himself. He had a huge army. But those Spaniards arrived, oh strange, oh exotic, you know. Well, let's see what they have to do. He never imagined in a moment that they could try to capture him because he was a secret person. Nobody even looked in his eyes. You can imagine that. But they succeeded in doing it.
After almost a year in captivity, Atahualpa believes he can save his life after all. He reckons with the Spaniards' greed and proposes a deal to Pizarro. He offers him a whole room full of gold for his freedom. Treasures for this gigantic ransom are arriving from all over the country. The room his subjects fill with gold is 3 meters high, but in the end, all efforts are in vain. Shortly afterwards, in a fake trial, the Spaniards passed the death sentence on Atahualpa. It was the most disgusting thing we Spaniards ever did in the West Indies. A chronicler will later accuse this regicide. On July 26, 1533, the strangers execute Atahualpa in his own kingdom. At the last moment, he had himself baptized to avoid being burnt to death. He wanted to at least save his body for the life in the hereafter. An executioner will strangle him with a garrote. About 200 million euros. That's how much the ransom money collected in vain for Atahualpa's life would be worth today.
It is very likely that the reason for Atahualpa's, let's call it execution, was fear. Pizarro knew for sure that Atahualpa had a strong backing. He simply saw no other possibility than to have the Inca ruler executed in order to seize the empire.
The Spaniards plunder the remaining gold and destroy the holy sites throughout the entire empire, also in Pachacamac. Many of the peoples once oppressed by the Incas join this merciless conquest and revenge. According to the archaeologists, Pachacamac is suddenly abandoned shortly after the Spanish plundering.
When the Spaniards arrived, they had no fear at all. They entered the crypt directly, they took the idol and they smashed it in front of the crowd. So for all these pilgrims and the Incas and the people that were there, it must have been very traumatic. It was like their god has been vanquished, or that if their god had abandoned them.
But the city itself was not destroyed. The buildings remained intact. But a strange find puzzles the archaeologists. During the excavation of a side temple, they find rooms completely littered with ceramic offerings. And the amazing thing about it, all the vessels are broken. The dating of these more than 100 objects reveals they all date back to the end of the Inca period. Something enormous must have happened. And as the reconstruction of the puzzle shows, probably on purpose, because the shards were spread over several rooms.
In ancient Andean mind and for the Incas, when you make such beautiful objects, you give life to them. And when you destroy them by smashing them and distributing their parts all over, it's like killing them. So it's really a farewell ceremony, a termination ritual, as we say in archaeology. And what is particularly poignant and dramatic in this case is that this heaven is the last one we have, and it's around the Spanish conquest.
Their mighty god had failed. at the moment of greatest threat. In a last act, the local priests celebrate his end. Only shards of his cult remain. Pachacamac is abandoned by its inhabitants. Soon, the Incas throughout the empire have to retreat further and further from the advancing conquistadors. Their empire becomes part of the Spanish kingdom, and Ollantaytambo and Vilcabamba become the last refuge of the remaining Inca fighters. The defenses in the mountains of Cuzco only give them a brief respite. Then, the Spanish crown takes over for good, and they are left with only a small realm in the hinterland. 40 years later, the last resistance is broken. With the execution of their last heir of the Inca rulers, the legendary refuge castle of Vilcabamba is also destroyed. The Sons of the Sun experienced the highest ascent, but also the deepest fall in the history of the South American continent. The arrival of the Spanish had changed everything. The old order and the old faith no longer applied. The rulers were no longer divine. The sun was only a star. In the sorrowful experience of foreign rule, the people will soon begin to glorify the time of the great kings as a utopia of a golden past, and create a myth of a legendary place to where the last Inca fled with the gold of their ancestors. Paititi, the lost city deep in the jungle. To this day, its treasures have, however, remained hidden from the eyes of the seekers. The magical world of the Andes preserves its secret.